Well, hello and welcome to Agile Expertise. My name's Chital and I'm really, really happy to see some familiar faces here again. So thank you for joining and welcome. Today we have got the wonderful Jenny Martin joining us. Now, Jenny is an Agile product and development coach, and she does a lot of work in the world of training, particularly in Agile training as well. And she's been a coach since 2011, similar to the work that I've been doing as well. So when I met Jenny, she was head of people at a company called Skills Matter. She wasn't just head of people, she was actually the co-founder of Skills Matter. And Jenny, you don't know this, but I was in absolute awe of the work that you were doing there. And I know Skills Matter, not from the training point of view, but more from you used to place experts onto stage, and they used to, share their knowledge. And I was always in absolute awe when, I'd just see you there taking and coordinating all the speakers and everything. I really thought I didn't think that was very intelligent or intelligent enough to even be there. So when I was actually invited to come and do the Power of Scrum at Skills Matter, you may not, like I said, you may not know this, but you pretty much you're the catalyst to where I am today. So just wanted to share that. So I wanted to say thank you for that. So yeah, when I first met you, I was like, oh my God, that woman's just awesome. So yeah, there we go. There is a little sad story as well around Jenny. So I think in 19th of September, you did Death by User Stories here, didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
And the sad story around it, my dad died at the same time.
Oh,
And I promised myself that going forward, we're not going to do titles with the word death in it. So on a positive note, that we were just very mindful about titles going forward. But, thank you, Jenny, for still going ahead and running that talk without me around that time. But, so anyway, yeah. So few house rules. We love to see your response and your engagement. So cameras on, we would really love that. However, this is recorded, and if you don't wish for your cameras to be on, that's absolutely fine too. If you have any questions while Jenny's speaking, please drop it into the chat window and we'll make sure that we address it at the end. And while people are speaking, including yourself, just make sure that we've got mute on the mute button on when we're not speaking. That's all. So without further ado, Jenny, I'm going to hand this over to you. I would like to introduce Jenny, who's going to be talking about unleashing kindness for team, flourishing and successes. So over to you, Jenny.
well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about kindness. So, despite having a kind of tech background, the things that really motivate me on a daily basis is much more about that feeling you get when teams are flourishing and reaching their potential and thriving, and all of that wonderful collective intelligence comes together. And so more recently, I've been able to work more on that kind of stuff, all the stuff that helps teams get there. And I started a postgrad, which I just finished, actually, postgrad 8 months ago, on the psychology of kindness and well-being in the workplace, which is the first of its kind from Sussex University. So I'm back to my psychology roots, and I've really enjoyed it. And one of the reasons I did this talk is because I've been doing so much research into kindness and well-being. So I'm going to be sort of debusting some myths about kindness, talking a little bit about the history of kindness, and some of the psychology behind it, why it's good to have a kind culture, and also what you can do to foster a culture of kindness. I'm sure we've already got a kindness bias in the room, right? Because you've come along. So we've got a job to do to spread kind leadership out beyond our own kind of practice as well. And I really want you to leave here thinking about how you can be more intentionally kind and how you can help others do that as well. Okay, so some history. Kindness has been kind of stigmatized over the years. This is a nice ChatGPT image. I asked it to depict two horses pulling in opposite directions, which is one of the things that Plato, going all the way back to the ancient philosophers, that Plato used to describe when talking about emotion and reason. And having, these two things at play, you couldn't have both. And so if we were to succumb to our emotions, we might be somehow sort of weakened or overwhelmed by them. And how if we were to sort of succumb to kindness and compassion, we'd become too vulnerable. And we might be frightened of becoming too aware of our own vulnerabilities. And this is even, there's still plenty of cultures where emotions are something that you should very much keep suppressed or under control. And emotional intelligence has only really been a thing since the 90s, right? And now we know, of course, that actually emotional intelligence is a really important part of our ability to succeed at work and to be good leaders. And even Freud, so even the psychoanalysts, so Sigmund Freud, known for exploring the depths of the human mind, and he talked about this primal pleasure ego and positioned kindness as like a guilty pleasure, something that that's repressed. And that, almost like, why should we care for each other or be concerned for each other and have compassion for them, unless it's some way of making sure they're available for us for some kind of gratification at a later date. So, there's all of this kind of weird stuff going on around emotions. And then kindness has always been feminized. So it's very much been feminized, even going right back to this French essayist and philosopher, this quote from 1580. Gentleness and softness is to do with weaker natures. And in the 19th century, we had this sort of Victorian image of an angel of the house. So, as a man, too much sympathy or kindness might undermine your manly gravitas, and to yield to kindness was feebly feminine. So this balance between ego and kindness, even sort of leave your emotions at the door. So when we think about leaving your emotions at the door, they don't come into the workplace. We think of this sort of archetypal mid-century male breadwinner, right? I even remember that. I even remember, so I started out my career 30 plus years ago now. And I remember expressing emotions being something that you should avoid. Leave it at home. Don't bring it to work. And then we have this term, soft skills. So we're a small group. How do we feel about the term soft skills? What does that sort of evoke? Any thoughts?
I think it implies it's less important. I mean, I think soft skills as a term is a bit dated now. It's not used so much, thankfully, but it certainly implies it's less important.
It certainly does, yeah. And it actually came from the US military in the 70s and their training, and they had hard skills training, which was all about the equipment and the ammunition and the guns, and soft skills training was about leadership, and they didn't undervalue it. For them, leadership in the army is really important, right? But so it's kind of been misused since then. But how can we have soft skills and be strong? Can we have soft skills and courage? And I know there's a whole soft skills redefinition movement happening at the moment to try and address this. And one of my friends, when I was putting this talk together, she said, well, it reminds me of Japanese warriors, because Japanese warriors learned to sew, and their gentleness is combined with this fierceness and this courage. And I love that. This idea that strength isn't just about this sort of martial prowess, but also about precision and care and empathy, where fierceness can coexist with gentleness. And certainly it's just a bit of a personal story. So this is me 30 years ago as a soft but fierce witch, right? Fierce and gentle. When I started out as a consultant, I fell into a job in IT and got a team and then another bigger team, and I made really good progress. All male peers, an entirely male environment. And I had quite a big team, about 60 folks on my team while I was doing that job. And they were extremely motivated and productive and happy and doing really well. And yet my fellow peers would use language like Jenny's loyal team, as if I was wielding around this sort of lady voodoo. Like how could they possibly want to work hard without being frightened of me? And they were genuinely a bit suspicious of it. It didn't quite understand it. And certainly, I know about this right now. So certainly when I've come across the opposite of me, which is the unempathetic person, they're actually quite uncomfortable around me. Right, so it's like I'm the nemesis of these people, and it's really interesting because when I was studying for my postgrad on kindness, the state of true kindness, the traits associated with true kindness, which I'll talk about later, is actually the opposite of psychopathy. Right, so those of us that have these skills can find ourselves up against very different characters, and we might make them feel quite uncomfortable. Okay, so talking a bit more about myself, even right at the beginning of my leadership career, I was told by a very caring senior manager to me, when I say caring, he cared about me and how I was doing. And in all seriousness, he said to me, Jenny, you'll never make it as a senior leader because you're not enough of an asshole. And he was saying that he thought to be kind. So we have this view that, in terms of leadership and the workplace, kindness is for losers. And if we think about corporate environments that are driven by market and profit, and they're encouraging competition and this kind of setting of values, and it sets heroic behaviours and competition. And often being seen as being kind or compassionate might lead people to think you're not tough enough to make the hard calls, which leads to these toxic environments. And there's research that shows this, that there's certainly a belief that leaders who treat people with respect and dignity are seen as less powerful and less likely to climb the corporate ladder. And there's some great books and reading on this that I've been doing. And in fact, talking about psychopathy, 20% of corporate leaders show traits similar to psychopaths for this reason. 20%. That's more common than in the prison population. The regular figure for the world is between 1% and 4%. So what we tend to do is see this charismatic, super confident, overconfident behaviour and say, oh, you'd probably be a great leader. Why don't we promote you up the ranks? But actually those character traits are quite prevalent in narcissism and psychopathy as well. Okay, so all in all, that's my kind of bit of history. Kindness has had rather a bad press. But what actually is it? What is kindness? So there's actually a growing body of research around kindness, and it's still evolving. There's lots of different definitions. This degree I did, not degree, this postgrad I just did at the University of Sussex are the first to run anything like that, and they did a really big collaboration between this author on kindness, Claudia Hammond, who worked with BBC Radio 4, involving over 60,000 people, figuring out what is kindness, what does kindness mean to you. And I did a similar thing. So I also put a little study out to my LinkedIn audience and said, what do you think kindness is? And here are the results. This is what we think kindness is. So right at the beginning, there's a big overlap between my answers and what Claudia Hammond discovered. So my answers came up as empathy, understanding, love, and compassion being as the top words for kindness. And in Claudia's study, empathy, care, helping, thoughtfulness, and compassion came up as what we mean by kindness. And so very, very similar there. And what psychology says is there's a number of different definitions, and it's actually this is a kind of one of the universal descriptions of kindness: actions aimed at fulfilling a spectrum of human needs, both for the giver and the recipient. Right? So there's benefits in being kind, and there's benefits in receiving kind behaviours. But it's complicated because it's a personality trait, it's a state that you can be in, it's a bit like compassion, it's within pro-social behaviour, it's a bit like empathy, it's a whole mixture of things, and it's difficult to define. So I'm going to give you a quick sort of whistle stop through the different facets that I was covering on my course. So we've got this sort of everyday courteousness, opening a door, giving up a seat. Those things tend to be sort of dictated by the social norms that we live within our cultures. Then there's more proactive altruistic behaviour, which is where you're going beyond in order to help somebody else. And then there's a sort of feeling sorry for somebody, looking after them, consideration of their feelings. And there's a more complicated diagram. This is from a very, very recent study which plotted kindness on these different scales. So there's two matrices, axes. I was saying to Sheetal, I'm menopausal and losing one in every 20 words. So apologies, I keep going out of my head. So on one scale, we've got whether or not the kindness comes from what we think are cognitions, or from something triggered more emotionally, more from our limbic system. That's one scale. And the other scale is about whether we're going through the motions because we think that's the right thing to do because of the social norms, or because we're going to take action more proactively. And so these different things that, there's principally socially prescribed kindness, effective proactive kindness, effective socially prescribed. There's all those different quadrants. And you can see there, I'm happy to share these slides after, you can see there the different things that describe those kinds of behaviour and why it's complicated. And right in the middle is this thing called anthropophilia, which doesn't even exist in the dictionary yet, or you can't even Google it. And this is the core of kindness, and it's that part which is considered to be the opposite of psychopathy, which I found really interesting. So this takes me to the next part of my talk, which is beyond nice. So a lot of us, I just gave you those definitions. A lot of us, when we think about kind, we think about that socially prescribed kind. And actually, we often use the word nice and kind interchangeably. And I think this is one of the reasons that it can get a bit of a bad press. When we think about nice, nice comes from the Latin word nescius, which means ignorant. Yeah, so that's where nice comes from. It's since evolved to mean timid or pleasant, but that's where it comes from. But kind is not to be soft or gullible, but to be fair and consistent and trustworthy. I love this from Claudia Howard, and I certainly can really relate to this. Most actions of that true kindness are inconvenient and hard, and they take effort and time and sometimes pride. All of these things sometimes come at the expense of being kind. Whereas niceness can sort of masquerade as kindness, but could be more motivated by, perhaps more social motives. So beyond nice can be hard. It's doing the difficult thing, standing up strongly for what's right. It can be giving difficult feedback. It can be giving a voice to somebody who hasn't been heard. It can be fiercely standing up to the narcissist who's going after someone on your team. It can be all of those things, and it can put yourself in the firing line. It can even be letting somebody down in the short term because it's the right thing. And so this is what I believe in terms of kindness and kind leadership. You may have read the book Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. Has anybody read this book apart from me? It's a super, 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 super read. I read it as part of an essay that I was putting together, and it's just one of the most useful books about leadership that I've read in a long, long time. And Brené Brown's talking about courage, dare to lead, courage in leadership. And one of the things that she talks about is how clear is kind, clear communication, and unclear is unkind. And what she means by unclear and unkind is this sort of nice, where we avoid the tough conversation because of the social norms, because we want to keep things harmonious, or we don't want to rock the boat, or we feed people half-truths to make them feel better. Or she talks about the dirty yes, which I've not heard of before, which is saying yes in a meeting and saying no later. And she talks about unclear being talking behind people's backs. I really like this because, that could be nice, right? But it's certainly not kind or clear. And she did this interview as part of her book to prepare for it, she interviewed 150 C-level leaders, and she asked, what, if anything, about the way people lead today needs to change in order for leaders to be successful in this rapidly changing environment? And overwhelmingly, the answer was, we need braver leaders and more courageous leaders. And so I was looking for an image to support this, and I asked ChatGPT, can you create me an image that demonstrates how kindness can be hard? It can be taking the hard road. It can be doing the difficult thing. It can be putting yourself at risk. And ChatGPT created me this image. With this text, kindness involved more than just pleasant gestures or easy acts of generosity. It's about making tough choices, facing personal challenges, and sometimes going against the flow to support others. It highlights the idea that true kindness is a courageous act that demands strength, resilience, and a willingness to take the road less travelled. And I like that. So kindness is good for business, despite all of the historic stigmatization of kindness and how it'll hold you back, and you'll be seen as fluffy and soft and feminine. And I remember, I don't know if anybody else has ever had Jenny, it's not about the people, this is about the business. And I remember thinking, yes, yes, it's about the business. Like, listen to me. And now this is fact. This is fact. If you're interested in research to support how kindness and compassionate leadership is good for business, there's overwhelming evidence now. I've been deeply involved in this. So kind leadership leads to better financial performance, better collaboration, higher engagement, more creativity, better talent retention. It helps organizations be more adaptable. And the reason for that is that, you know, it's to do with our motivation and effectiveness at work is to do with our well-being. It's to do with our psychological well-being. And we know this now. We know from Google's Project Aristotle. Has anybody heard of Google's Project Aristotle? Yeah, so back in 2012, Google kicked off this big project to figure out what are the attributes of super high performing teams. And they looked at over 80 teams, I think, and they found out after 2 years that the single most important contributing factor to high performing teams is this thing called psychological safety, right? Which we're now talking about. Been talking about this since 1999 when Amy Edmondson coined that. And so when we think about psychological safety, that's about environments where folks feel safe to contribute, safe to learn, and ultimately safe to challenge. So it's not just about nice, it's about candor and authenticity. And to achieve this psychological safety, we need to remove the psychological hazards that create stress and instead embrace practices that help us promote empathy and compassion. So you probably know that the most common cause of stress, common cause of absenteeism at work is stress. But what I didn't know until I saw this statistic from Perkbox is that the most common cause of that is work-related politics. So this is all that stuff, the dirty yes, the passive aggressiveness, the talking behind somebody's back, the not finding out that you're going to get a bad review until your year review period comes around. And so we need to figure out how to remove these psychological hazards in order to create this environment where we can foster psychological safety, where we can have our teams working at their best. And yes, that can mean being liked. So is it okay as a leader to be liked by your team? Is that effective? Because when I started out, it was like you had to keep your team at arm's length because you had to be sort of slightly untouchable and a bit kind of frightening. In 2013, there was a study where 360 feedback of 50,000 leaders was evaluated to look at the relationship between effectiveness and likability. And the results showed that a leader who was not liked but considered effective was as rare as 1 in 2,000. 1 in 2,000 not liked but still effective. Yeah. So yes, being liked is a good indicator of being an effective leader. So we can see that kindness is good for business, right? Kindness is also good for you, good for me. It's good for everybody. It's good for all of us. And I've got there's a wonderful book by a man called David Hamilton on the 5 side effects of kindness. And these things are from him. So firstly, kindness makes us happier. So acts of kindness are not only bring smiles to the faces of those who we're kind to, but they also make us happy. They give us a sense of joy and self-esteem and purpose. And so there's studies where they've proven that more acts of kindness relieve depression and reduce social anxiety. So this thing called a helper's high is an actual thing, leading to feelings of increased self-worth and even sort of euphoric feelings, euphoric menopause, euphoric feelings. So that's one thing. It's good for the heart. So this is representing this picture, oxytocin. So oxytocin is a hormone that's produced by the hypothalamus and released into the bloodstream by the pituitary gland. And it's often called the love drug because it promotes positive feelings and it's good for the heart. So when oxytocin is triggered, it leads to a release of chemicals and hormones which dilate our arteries and reduce blood pressure and slow aging and reduce wrinkles, regenerate muscles, good for the arteries and the skin. And so if we think from a physiological perspective, kindness is the opposite of stress. So it's countering all the cortisol and all the stress hormones by being kind. And then this blew me away, this piece of research. So this is a chromosome. And so your DNA within the nuclei of your cells, each chromosome carries your genetic details. And as the cells in your body divide, your chromosomes need to replicate so that each cell can contain a complete set of chromosomes in its nucleus. And at the end of each of the chromosomes, what looks here like little orange socks are these little stretches of DNA called telomeres. And these telomeres protect our chromosomes from becoming tangled when they divide or becoming frayed. So each time a cell divides, these little telomeres become slightly shorter until eventually they become so short that the cell can no longer divide and the cell dies. And this length of the little booties, the telomeres, is an indicator of health, aging, lifespan, cancer risk. And there is a study, so there's so much research that shows kindness is good for us. There's a study whereby they compared the length of telomeres in people who either practiced the loving kindness meditation, which is about spreading compassion and kindness for ourselves and others, which is like a mindfulness meditation, but very much focused on loving kindness, with another group who were doing a regular mindfulness meditation and another group who did no meditation at all. And incredibly, while the telomere length shortened in both of the other groups, in the group doing the loving kindness meditation, the telomeres didn't shorten at all. Which is, so in other words, feelings of kindness and compassion seem to slow aging at the genetic level, which is wild, absolutely wild. And of course, kindness improves relationships, and relationships are another indicator of longevity. It's what we find attractive in other people, what they find attractive in us. And the other nice thing that David Hamilton talks about is this ripple effect, how kindness is contagious. So there's all sorts of studies that show if you do something kind for somebody, they're much more likely to do something kind for somebody else, and they're much more likely to do something kind for somebody else, and you get this lovely ripple effect. And so David Hamilton describes that in his book. Just as a pebble dropped into a pond, it creates ripples that lift lily pads on the other side. Acts of kindness lift spirits and carry kindness forward, uplifting others. So are you sold yet? Have I made the sell yet for kindness? Have I made the sell? I know you're all converted anyway, all right? Otherwise you wouldn't be here. So what can you do? what can you do? We're into the last bit now. What can you do? How can you be more intentionally kind? How can you create a culture built on kindness? How can you lead with compassion? And the first thing is about leading with kindness and compassion. Brené Brown says, I define a leader as anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and who has the courage to develop that potential, self-aware enough to lead from their hearts rather than unevolved leaders who lead from hurt and fear. I love that. I love that. Unevolved. Let's evolve. And to bring about this flourishing, we must pay attention to the soil as well as the seed. So even the most extraordinary seed can't thrive in toxic soil. So we need to create truly human workplaces that are instilled with this deep sense of compassion, where people feel safe and cared for, and where their psychological needs are met. And so let's talk about psychological needs briefly. So this is a bit more psychology. This has been really solid theory since the 1980s. This is about intrinsic motivation, which I'll talk a bit more about in a little while. And so this is talking about, these are universal needs across geographies, cultures. We all need these things to thrive as human beings. So autonomy, obviously, being able to get our jobs done, feeling that we're in control of things, not being micromanaged, being given problems to solve and all of the context and background, rather than just solutions to deliver. The second one is about competence. This is about mastering our capacity to interact with our environment. It's about growth and support and development and having the right skills. It's about receiving encouragement and constructive feedback, being recognised for your strengths. The third one is relatedness and belonging, and this is one of the biggest drivers of our well-being. And this involves feelings of closeness and belonging in a social group. And feelings of relatedness are enhanced when we feel respected and cared for by others and are part of an inclusive environment. So you can see how important kindness is. More recently, you might have read a book by Daniel Pink called Drive, which is building on these themes. And he talks about three things: autonomy, mastery, which is very similar to competence, and purpose. And more recently, I've been studying the work of Martin Seligman, which talks about the model of well-being PERMA, which stands for P for positive emotions, E for engagement, R for relationships, M for meaning, and A for accomplishment. And so these are all kind of similar universal needs. They're all kind of sitting around the same points. And now there's so much evidence that shows this is what we need to achieve our potential. And of course, when we achieve our potential and our well-being is high, the results improve at work, right? Everything else changes. So we want practices that help address these psychological needs, much more systemic stuff. One of the things I found out from my course is that things like mindfulness apps, yoga, fruit bowls, pool tables, they're all very nice, but they don't work to address well-being in the workplace. These things are much more to do with these systemic issues in organizations and these needs that we have. And so a lot of that is about having compassion, right? I love this quote, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. So I really believe that we're all navigating the world with our own experiences and our own brains, and we're all wired very differently, and most of us are doing our best. And so when we assume good intent and choose to see the best in someone else, we can start to, and when we role model this behavior as leaders, we can start to create environments which are based more on compassion and empathy. So I won't talk you through all of this, but this is the empathy staircase. So all creatures are capable of empathy, right? Even woodlouse, even a little woodlouse will see another woodlouse and see, oh, you seem stressed. Now I'm stressed too. You know, so even woodlouse can do it. But we are very unique in our capacity to understand or feel what another human is feeling. So, you know, lots of mammals can sympathize and see, oh, you've hurt your paw. You know, an elephant can recognize an upset herd mate and offer them little gentle caresses. The pro-social level, you know, a dog might share their food with a hungrier dog. The perspective taking is much rarer. So dolphins and primates, dolphins form a body raft for an injured dolphin and keep them alive, which is a beautiful thing. But as humans, you know, we are really unique, and we need to embrace our humanness at the moment, I think, more than ever. So there's tools that can help us in terms of this. So I'll talk to you in a very quickly. How do we practice communication that stops us from judging? A lot of our communication is loaded with judgment and not taking accountability for our own emotions. And we often project our expectations and our own values onto others, which leads to judgment and conflict. So trying not to judge and observe and notice and interrupt your kind of thoughts of and perceptions is really important. Listening is one of the most important things that we can do. This has taken me 30 years to be able to do. So I see this in so many people taking their first steps into the workplace. And, you know, it's a strength, right? To have a clear idea of what you want to say, to feel confident. These are all strengths, but, you know, I want to speak, 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 I want to speak. These things can get in the way of properly hearing other people. And so active listening is not just about giving good eye contact and not interrupting and giving somebody your attention, but it's actually surrendering to listening rather than waiting to respond. And that includes advice. And it includes, yes, that happened to me too. Here's my tale. So not giving advice and just listening is a real gift to somebody else. So some things to help us spread compassion. Another thing I mentioned about basic human needs. We know now that the carrot and the stick don't work. So this is what Dan Pink talks about a lot in his book about what really motivates us. And so intrinsic motivation is the basic human needs, you know, the motivation coming from within. The extrinsic motivation is power, money, fear, all these things, and bonuses. Yeah. And we know that this just doesn't work. Once you've got your basic needs met in terms of you feel fairly paid, everything else is about this flourishing that I was talking about, which relates to human needs. So we want to do everything we can to foster that compassionate culture, appreciate people. One of the most important things that people say, if you ask people, think of a time you had a good day at work, 60% of those good days at work include appreciation. So it's huge for us how we feel it's being appreciated. So reward behaviours, not results. And notice and appreciate. I quite like this. The problem with making an extrinsic reward the only destination that matters is that some people will choose the quickest route there, even if it means taking the low road, which takes us back to those toxic environments. So kind of back to the three things, I haven't mentioned the other two. The first thing, be compassionate as a leader. All of those things that I talked about, listening, meeting halfway, seeking to understand, addressing human psychological needs. Those are all about leading with compassion. How do we embed a kind culture? So there's interventions, right, that you can take at an organizational level. One of them, which I'm particularly passionate about, is strengths-based interventions, where you help folks figure out where their normal strengths lie, because we spend a lot of time trying to fix ourselves. It's much better for our well-being when we're pursuing things we're naturally good at and getting better at them. And it's also extremely useful in building compassionate teams when we can understand our teammates' strengths and feel a bit more insightful about why they're behaving the way that they are and what life is like through their lens. And so I'm super interested in everything to do with positive psychology, which is where all of these different strengths-based interventions come from. There's Strengths Finder, there's by Gallup, there's VIA, Values in Action, Virtues and Character Strengths by Seligman, which is the original one. This is one I'm passionate about because I'm a trainer. I train people to be facilitators in this technique. But you're much more likely to develop and be awesome in the direction of your strengths than you are than trying to fix weaknesses, which is often how our workplaces operate. Other sort of interventions, so non-violent communication and helping folks give better, more effective feedback with candor is really useful for building this culture of authentic communication. I've done other talks on non-violent communications. I could talk about that for some time, but these things help you have the tools to prepare for a challenging conversation and have the courage to tackle things that you might feel like avoiding or you don't feel brave enough. These tools will help you be able to do that without causing hurt or harm to the other person, in a way that you're able to build an authentic dialogue back and forwards and meet each other's needs. Which is what I love about those tools. And the third thing is notice kindness and practice kindness. So play kindness forward. Encourage and celebrate acts of kindness in the workplace. This comes back a little bit to calling out behaviours as well as results, and recognizing those kind acts. And we know that there's this ripple effect, which means that they tend to play forward and make everybody happier and healthier. So this is the bit of the brain that we need to work, right? This is the anterior insular cortex. It's consistently involved in empathy, compassion, fairness, cooperation. And interestingly, the more we work it, the more it grows. It's neuroplasticity. And so the kinder we are, the more compassion that we show, the better we get at it. And the more we develop our kindness muscle. And actually the Buddhists that do the loving kindness meditation, through their practice of compassion, are actually become more resilient to hurt and harm from others. So it actually helps you become a more resilient human being, which I found really interesting. So yeah, neurons that regularly fire together, wire together, is the is the saying about neuroplasticity. So let's work that muscle. Let's evolve. It's time to lead with our hearts beyond nice. It's time to lead with kindness, empathy, understanding. So we want to embed a kind culture, lead with compassion, think about interventions and tools that help to address well-being and help teams and individuals flourish, like nonviolent communication, strength-based interventions. Practice kindness, look out for it, celebrate it, spread it around. So yes, go be kind. It takes courage to be kind. We need to go beyond nice. And I love this quote from Minouche Shafiq. You know, we're in the world of machines. In the past, jobs were about muscles. Now they're about brains, but in the future, they'll be about the heart. And that's me. That's my talk on kindness. Thank you very much for listening.
Jenny, that was amazing. Thank you. I've got like notes all over my desk here. But one thing that really comes to mind is the knock-on effect kindness has. I feel so comfortable now after hearing this that I can just proceed and being myself and it's fine. I went through a really hard time at one point where at every stage I had to consider how the other person was going to react about a certain situation. I won't go into the situation, unfortunately, but you know, I'm really glad that I didn't take an aggressive approach and I wasn't mean in any way, shape, or form. And it's so true that you do end up building a sense of resiliency when it comes to people then speaking to you in an unkind manner. You actually find a way of dealing with it quite positively. So no, thank you. You've just validated a few things here for me.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Yeah, it's I've reflected so much on my course at all sorts of things over the last 25, 30 years. Yeah, and how just it is validating to know that actually it wasn't just a sense like this is the right thing to do or this is integrity or whatever, but it does actually work. It is actually the best way. And now we have so much evidence to show that. So
that's fantastic. Thank you. Anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Jenny?
you stop sharing.
And Maru, Tom, I just wanted to say welcome. I see that you've just joined recently, so this has been recorded. So we will I'll share the link to the recording afterwards. But good to see you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dora. I'm happy. I'm on time for the discussion.
So, any questions on kindness that you'd like to share with Jenny? Richard.
Thanks for a really interesting session, and it fits with a lot of stuff I've sort of been recently discovering. But I've got a sort of a negative question, if you like, which is that you talked towards the end about those who are, well, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And I don't know if you come across the work of Karen Stenmer. She's written a book called The Authoritarian Disposition.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that, yes. But
she argues that about a third of the population are genetically predisposed towards, sort of, they find change difficult, they find difference difficult, and I mean, all the things you see in the Trump supporters and in this country, and I think they tend to be extrinsically motivated, i.e., they think people, motivated either by reward or by punishment. So I haven't read the Pink Book. I mean, it's sort of somewhere on my list of things to read, but I mean, I'd like to believe, and certainly, my whole philosophy is one of that it's about creating the right spaces and that intrinsic motivation works. But I do worry about that section of the community. And the other, I mean, related to that, I don't know if you've come across, I've only just come, I went to another, I work in the charity sector historically around digital stuff. I actually went to a charity meetup and there was somebody else talking about kindness. But one of the other speakers actually talked about the Schwartz model of human values. And it's, I mean, it has some of the components that you showed in that, in the psychological thing, but it also includes things like, I mean, it's got a conservation quadrant where you've got things like security, conformity, tradition. These are, I think, clearly important values for some people.
Yes, yeah. There's lots of different models, isn't it?
Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, you're not. And it's really interesting because I had a similar question the last time I talked about this, about intrinsic, extrinsic. There's lots of the thing with psychology and sciences, right? It's their models and theories, right? They're some of them conflict each other, and some of them are very similar. And so in terms of motivation, you've also got Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which has got things like safety and security at the bottom, and these things we're talking about in terms of psychological needs are higher up the pyramid. Though you only start caring about them when you feel safe. So there's so many different factors at play as well. But also, if we think about personality science, which I'm also really, really interested in terms of our values and how we see things, some of us see things in a much more achievement-based, work ethic way than other people do, right? So people also want to be led in different ways, and they have different things that they respond to. And so there's no one approach, I don't think, that's going to work for everybody. One of the things I like about any of the strengths-based interventions is that you can figure out what works for people at an individual level and give them a language which helps them communicate and say what their needs are. And it can be fine. It's also one of the things, just going off on a bit of a tangent, one of the things today is that young people, thankfully, don't take any shit these days, right? They have higher expectations about what a work environment can be like. But it can also mean, I work with some CEOs, for example, who are incredible founders and executives doing all sorts of stuff, but find it really hard to say, I'm asking you to do this. Like, I'm the CEO. And so like that's got quite hard for people now. And so it's about finding a balance between saying compassionately, somebody here is going to make a decision and that person's me. and so it's a minefield. It's a minefield. So yeah, I'll have to take a look at that book that you mentioned. Can you tell me the name of it again?
The Authoritarian Disposition. I'll see if I mean, the sum total of my knowledge comes from a Radio 4 half-hour program that I listened to, but it was really interesting. I mean, it's not. I mean, I think your point about. I mean, what's the person who was presenting this was a fundraiser, and her point was that we need to understand where people are coming. I mean, in terms of change, you need to start from where people are at. And I think we need to recognise that, and I mean, this is the point she was making, that not everybody is like us. And that what works for one person doesn't work for another, and that if you are working, I mean, I know a lot of organisations that have tried to go for a sort of holacracy, flat structure sort of thing. About a third of the people leave because it doesn't work for them. And I think what you said about the strengths-based approach and understanding where everybody is at. And looking at understanding that not everybody has the same, that what works for me in terms of motivation and what gives me pleasure is causes other people high levels of anxiety. They want to be, I think the argument is, there's a section of the community who want to be told, who feel very uncomfortable. They want to be told what to do.
And I think that's a whole different thing as well, because you can be, I think this is as well the difference between kind and nice, right? Or kind and soft. And so you can be kind and compassionate and firm, and kind and compassionate and set boundaries, and kind and compassionate and deal with unreasonable behavior and all of those things. And I think it's about navigating that and figuring out we can be all of those things. It doesn't mean that we have to, you can have a very compassionate leader in a very hierarchical organization. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. One of the things in the Dan Pink book, which I remember, which is about the intrinsic motivation, is they give, so looking at it from different angles, but one of the things he's talking about is that for people to enjoy what they're doing, so not just about being told what to do, but to enjoy what they're doing. And there's two sets of kids that are in a room, and they're given this like little puzzle to play with, and the puzzle is on the desk, and in one room the kids are rewarded with sweets for however many puzzles they can solve, and in the other room there's no such thing. They're given they're both given another, they think they're there for another reason. Interestingly, in the breaks, the kids that were being paid in sweets stopped solving the problems, stopped playing with the puzzle, whereas the kids that had no reward continue to play. And it's because, so they see it, this is one of the really interesting bits, is what you perceive as work. And as soon as it's perceived as work with a reward, I'm not doing it unless I get a reward. And it's those bits that I found really interesting.
Pam, you have
Pam, sorry, Pam, hand up.
But thanks for the talk, Jenny. It's brilliant. I haven't got so much as got questions as observations. It's a couple of things that you said. I mean, firstly, I love working with really young people, because you're so right. They don't take any, they don't take any shit. They're much more open, and that's a good thing for authenticity.
Fabulous, yeah.
And so it's really good for us to learn that from them and still be able to lead, because it's not an obstacle. The other thing that I am reflecting on is that you talked a bit about the dangers of charismatic leadership. You didn't put it too strongly, but it's what I've also recognized through my career, that there are certain people that have got where they are through charisma. Charisma is really good for leaders, but it can also hide other things, and that's a little bit dangerous. So I was actually quite pleased to hear that said out loud, because it's the sort of thing that you think, and you think, I'm so mean.
Yeah,
But we've all come across some of those, I suspect.
Yeah, I've been reading a book, looking for it on my shelf, which is Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders, which I recommend. Sorry, wonderful men. It's about this narcissism in the workplace, which is mostly a male trait compared. There are more women recently being identified as narcissist, but it's much more of a male trait. And yeah, it's really interesting because it's to do with this overconfidence being seen as leadership potential, and yet when women display, women are labelled as not being confident. And it's not that they're not confident, they're often perfectly confident, it's just they're not exuding these overconfident behaviours, they're more inwardly confident. And when they do exude the same confident behaviours as men in the way that men do, they get punished for it, for being aggressive, or for being, I used to get called school teachery for when I showed my overconfidence, right? And so there's all this research that shows that when women do display those skills, they get punished, and they get falsely labelled as not having the confidence to take on the position. So there's so many. I really recommend the book, and it's giving all sorts of tips as to what we should do to spot it and how to level the playing field.
Yeah, I mean
Sounds really
that
valuable.
actually absolutely makes sense. In fact, one thing that comes to mind for me, I got labelled flirting with the boys because I used to get things done, and it was nothing to do with that at all. It was just like we just got things done because I was openly communicating and just being very transparent about the work that needed doing. And so yeah, it's an interesting thing. Mara, you had a question?
Just a reaction to what Jenny was saying. I find that, at least from a single perspective, my life out of 8 billion lives on this planet, at least to be very, very accurate. But I wanted to share two different parallel, let's say, life experiences to what she was kindly sharing, which is one, you know, I guess it's a bit of a dangerous field. It could be labeled as, immigrant trauma or something. But I wanted to share two things that I think are relevant for what she shared, but from a very different side of life, being a woman, and then having those behaviors, and then the reactions that are associated with that, coming from people. The number one is the experience of an immigrant working in a very, let's say, very selective field, strategy, etc., and being the only one, the only the only one not belonging to a very, very particular social, let's say, category of people coming from the same universities, private ones, etc. No need to go about the details of the segmentation, but think very, very outside the group, and then displaying lower degrees of common behaviors that you could describe as very common to that culture, etc., but then getting very different signals back and very different reactions, kind of like what Jenny was explaining from her perspective. Showing confidence, not even overconfidence, just you could say sane levels or healthy levels of confidence that you could get by looking at the culture you're evolving, and then getting very different feedback, sometimes very aggressive, very how can I say, you can feel like an outcast, and be made to feel like that way very clearly. And the other one has nothing to do with social or ethnic background. It has to do with a different kind of social category. Bit of an oxymoron there, contradiction there, which is the nerd, being the nerd in a world full of management consultants. That's also, I noticed, led to the same phenomenon of rejection for displaying even lower intensity levels of the same behaviors that you notice in that culture. Trying to fit in, learning from people because you come in there, you're open, etc. But being a computer scientist and a nerd doing now strategy work, you got very, very, rejection-like signals back from the group. It was not just from unique people, and that's a unconscious behavior I observed, at least in my story. And I wanted to share those two things back. So one, immigrant example, and the other one is the geek or the nerd example. And yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks for sharing that, Mary. Yeah, it's we all have biases, right? But yeah, things need to change, don't they? And I guess it starts with having some of these authentic conversations or trying to give teams the tools to do it. But often some of the toxic leadership that you talk about is so ingrained at the top of organizations and not only tolerated but celebrated and encouraged. This is why we need this call to arms to evolve, right?
Yeah, for sure. So there was one, actually, I've got a question for you, Jenny. Does anybody else have any questions before I proceed with I'm going to call it the last one afterwards. So one more.
I've got one more, but you go first.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
it's
Richard,
only
go for it.
time.
Go for it, because then I'll wrap up afterwards.
It was just really linking what you've been talking about, Jenny, with something part of the reason I'm here is I've got very interested in sort of complexity theory and how you work with complex problems. And I don't know if you've come across adaptive spaces, Mary Albine's work, and she talks about a process of conflicting and connecting that very often when you're doing change in an organization, there's a lot of conflict around. But that conflict is often there for good reasons, and in a traditional hierarchy, it gets suppressed.
Yes.
And with complex problems, if you hide, people aren't telling you stuff, then whatever solution you come up with isn't going to work because you haven't fully understood the problem. And what she argues is you need mechanisms that allow that conflict to surface, and then then find connections. And I think it fits very well with having, you know, the likability stuff, you know, learning to listen, and trying to get everybody to listen to each other. And that out of that, you get emergent solutions that are actually a lot, you know, the traditional hierarchy where the, you know, the top, typically man, knows the right thing to do, just doesn't work in this modern day world. You need a world in which, you know, everybody is listened to. I mean, there's a lovely quote I came. I'll stop when I said this, but there's a lovely quote I came across. I mean, you may have come across it already. Everybody knows something that you don't. Listen to them, you know, and it's by creating spaces within which everybody is listened to, but you know, but also where conflict is handled in a healthy way, which I think fits well with what you're saying about being kind is not about being nice. Gratuitous niceness was the term I came across recently. You know, how we do conflict, I think, is essential. You know, finding ways of doing conflict that work is, I think, a key part of that overall package.
Yeah, I really relate to that. So I'm familiar with Dave Snowden's Cynefin stuff around complexity. I guess it might be
It's
sort of
related to
related.
that, you know.
Yeah, and certainly. So if we think about groups making good decisions, of course, diverse groups make better decisions. Even if there's not an expert there, a diverse group will make a better decision than a kind of homogeneous group. And that includes, to avoid groupthink and come up with these emergent solutions, it includes conflict. So conflict, a little bit of conflict in a group is actually an indicator of good decision making. But in order to have it, you have to be able to have this candor, like as you're talking about, and these tools to have that conversation without being hurtful. And so non-violent communication is one thing that I've been studying for the last like 5 or 6 years. And whilst it's very precise in some ways, some of the aspects of it in terms of moving quickly towards understanding the needs of somebody else is the really good tools to help diffuse conflict and properly hear the needs of the other person rather than concentrating on whatever paradigm is going in your head. So yeah, thanks for that, Richard. All interesting stuff.
Thank you, Richard. So the question I've got, well, first of all, there's an observation here around kindness, and I guess I've got two kind of double-barreled questions around it. So the first part is when it comes to being kind, I think it's easier to do when you have no expectations of anything in return. It just, I don't know, I feel like when you expect something in return, actually the kindness can go away because you then might end up feeling a bit bitter. But sometimes, in some cases, you've mentioned kindness is to be clear, and actually it's unkind to be unclear. But in some cases, you could be telling the truth about something, but the receiving party might not be open to receiving that truth. What has kindness taught you in terms of handling something like that? And what has your study taught you about handling something like that? Because sometimes you can lose people just by being honest with them, right?
Yes, yeah, I totally get that. And yeah, it's sort of interweaves with feedback as well, doesn't it? So one of the really important things about giving effective feedback is that you have permission to give it. And so if we're thinking about these relationships where perhaps you see that an intervention is best for everybody, but could be harmful or hurtful to that person, it can be really, really difficult. I love what you said about expectations. My mum used to say, don't expect anything from anybody. That has really been good advice for me, because that's expectation is a projection, isn't it, of your own values and beliefs.
Yeah, ditto.
And so I guess in terms of kindness, I think I work harder to really think about what they need and whether the blunt truth or whatever it is actually the thing. And it might be that they're not quite ready for that. And it might be that there are some other steps towards it which are a bit less obvious, but could help with them taking some steps forward or whatever it is.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like, you know, steps towards almost getting them to self-realize what the problem might be.
Yeah, but it's also going back to nonviolent communication. It's about removing any sort of judgment. So, for example, I had a very close friend that I'm no longer friends with, which is quite a sad story. But we were close, and we used to talk about each other's feelings. And I remember feeling very sad and disappointed and a bit angry at a series of conversations that we'd had. And because we shared each other's feelings a lot, I thought it was okay to tell her how I felt, right? But I didn't tell her how I felt. I said to her, I feel judged. I feel underestimated. I feel misunderstood. Right. So I thought that was authentic communication, but they were all projections at her. Yet my feelings were actually sadness and anger. Those are feelings. The other things aren't feelings, they're thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. And where they're thoughts, I've made an evaluation about her behavior and labeled it,
yeah,
and projected it back at her.
So-
Which is, and she's no longer my friend, right? It was really sad. And so if I'd have said instead, I am sad and I'm getting angry, this is what I need. I noticed this from you. That makes me think this. What's going on with you? It would have gone in a very different direction, the conversation.
It was more outward than inward, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it's about so all of those tools, they help you structure those really challenging conversations in a way that you're really looking for the needs that the other person has, rather than trying to solve them or trying to give your judgment of the situation.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, but once you've learned the sort of practice, you can then reflect on communication all around you and go, oh God, no wonder he's getting really wound up. Like, you can see what's happening here.
Yeah. Amazing. Jenny, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. For those of you who want to learn more about Jenny, she is actually offering a discount code for her next training, which is called Strong Suits Check Training. It will be held on the 5th and the 6th of June. Jenny, would you like to just share a little bit more about that, and then we can say our goodbye?
Oh yes, I'd completely forgotten about that actually. So thanks for reminding. So I've just put in the chat, there's this wonderful tool called Strong Suits, which is basically, it's just a pack of cards with 52 different strengths and 4 different suits in. And it's I came across it about a year ago. It's a really, really awesome team tool for helping you understand your strengths, but helping others understand their strengths as well. And if you work with teams and you're trying to make those kind of changes, this is quite, I think, quite oh, Mary, you know Strong Suits, hooray, it's not very well known. That's amazing. Anyway, here's the discount code for 10% off, Psych Safe. And it's something, so I've done the Gallup Strengths Finder, I've done the Values in Action Strengths. With this, you don't need to do a psychometric test, you don't get labelled, you're not labelled as green or red or anything like that. Your top 5 strengths are unique to you, about 1 in 200 million, something like that. So it's a wonderful tool to start to build relationships and candor between people so that they can have better conversations and understand each other better. So yeah, sorry to end with a sell. She'd asked me, is there anything you're doing which you'd like to share? I was like, well, actually, yes, there is.
No, it's more than welcome. If you're doing great work, then it's not really a sell. It's actually you're sharing a little bit more of what you can offer. So that's how I see it. It's not a sell at all from my perspective. But Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us tonight. And hopefully we'll see you again next time. Next time we've got Michelle coming along, who will be talking about, if I remember correctly, see my menopause is kicking in now. He's going to be talking about structuring teams and organizations as well. So please do join us again next time. Thank you, Jenny, again for coming and sharing all this amazing knowledge. And I'll see you all next time.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
Emily.
everyone.
Thanks, Chantal. Thanks, Jenny.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Care.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.